My CEO jumped into my car, then said, "We're going on our first date, and you don't get a vote." I was halfway through convincing myself I should quit when my CEO yanked open my car door, slid into the passenger seat like she owned the vehicle, and calmly buckled her seatbelt. "You drive," she said. I stared at her, convinced I was dreaming. "Ms. Harper, what are you doing?" She turned toward me with the same expression she used during board meetings, the one that made billion-dollar investors stop talking. "We're going on our first date," she said, "and you don't get a vote." Then she smiled. That smile terrified me far more than her words ever could. I had worked at Holloway Technologies for exactly 14 months. Long enough to know two things. First, our CEO, Evelyn Harper, wasn't someone people joked about. Second, she never smiled. Not in meetings, not at company parties, not when we landed our biggest contract in company history. The woman was 34, brilliant, impossibly wealthy, and famous for reducing arrogant executives to silence with a single question. I was 28, a software engineer from a small town who still packed lunch every day because spending $20 on a salad felt criminal. People like her didn't jump into cars like mine, especially not a 12-year-old sedan that rattled every time the air conditioner turned on. "You've got the wrong employee," I finally managed. "I don't." "I think you do. I've checked twice." She folded her hands in her lap. "Drive. Where? I'll tell you. I don't even know if I want to. I already told you. You don't get a vote." I laughed nervously. She wasn't kidding. I sighed, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking garage. For 5 silent minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Am I getting fired?" She looked genuinely surprised. "No." "Then, promoted?" "No." "Is this some weird executive evaluation?" "No." I glanced at her. "Then why are you in my car?" She looked out the window before answering. "Because everyone else lies to me." That wasn't the answer I expected. They tell me what I want to hear. They laugh before I finish jokes that aren't funny. They agree with ideas they secretly hate. They pretend not to notice when I'm exhausted. She looked back at me. "You don't." I almost drove onto the curb. "What?" "3 weeks ago," she continued, "during the product review meeting, I suggested removing a feature." I remembered. Everyone around the table had immediately agreed. Except me. I'd politely explained why removing it would frustrate customers. She'd stared at me for 10 seconds. Then she'd said, "Interesting." The feature stayed. "I thought you were angry." "I was thinking." She smiled faintly. I swallowed. "That doesn't explain this. It explains why I noticed you." The silence returned, except now it was somehow louder. She directed me toward the waterfront. Instead of expensive restaurants filled with celebrities, she pointed toward a tiny diner, squeezed between an old bookstore and a laundromat. "You can park there." I stared at the building. This place? Yes. You could eat literally anywhere. I know. Inside, the diner smelled like fresh coffee and homemade pie. The waitress looked at Evelyn, then at me, then back at Evelyn. "You two together?" Before I could answer, Evelyn nodded. "Hopefully." "Hopefully." I nearly choked. We sat in a corner booth. She ordered pancakes. I ordered coffee because I suddenly couldn't remember how food worked. She watched me over the menu. "You're uncomfortable." I think that's the understatement of the century. I expected that. "Did you?" "Yes." "Then why ambush me?" She sighed. "Because if I'd asked through my assistant, you would have said no." She wasn't wrong. I would have assumed it was a prank. Exactly. Our food arrived. For several minutes we ate quietly. Then she asked something completely unexpected. What makes you happy? P. What? She took another bite. 1. Not your job. She tilted her head. What actually makes you happy? She tilted her head. Not money. She tilted her head 1 more. No one had asked me that in years. My niece. I went and told her about 7-year-old Lily, who believed dinosaurs still existed somewhere in Canada. I told her about 7-year-old Lily, who believed dinosaurs still existed somewhere in Canada. About how every Saturday we built ridiculous inventions from cardboard boxes. About how she'd once declared me the second smartest person alive. Who's first? Evelyn asked. She tilted her head. 1 more. Evelyn laughed. Actually laughed. It transformed her face. For the first time, she looked less like the intimidating CEO from magazine covers and more like a normal woman. I like her already. I smiled despite myself. What about you? She looked down at her coffee. Those 6 words sounded heavier than anything she'd said all evening. My calendar tells me where to be every 15 minutes. She stirred her drink. I've spent so many years building this company that I forgot how to simply exist. I didn't know what to say. She looked at me again. You leave work on time. Usually. You refuse weekend emails unless it's an emergency, because weekends matter. You eat lunch outside. The office cafeteria feels like a hospital. She nodded. I've watched you. That sentence should have sounded creepy. It sounded lonely. As we left the diner, rain began falling. Not heavy, just enough to make the sidewalks shine. She stopped walking. Can we walk anyway? You'll get wet. I know. So we walked. She stretched out a hand and let the rain collect in her palm. I haven't done this since college. Walk in the rain? She nodded. I was always too busy. Something about that made my chest ache. The richest woman I'd ever met was standing in the rain like she'd discovered a forgotten miracle. We talked for another hour. Not about work. About childhood, books, embarrassing memories. When I finally drove her home, I expected security gates and a mansion. Instead, she directed me to a surprisingly modest house overlooking the river. It's beautiful, I admitted. I never have time to enjoy it. Before getting out, she hesitated. I had a nice time. So did I. She smiled again. This time, you get a vote. What? Would you like a second date? I laughed. You're asking? I'm learning. I pretended to think. She narrowed her eyes. I seem to remember someone saying, I don't get a vote. You've earned one. Then yes. Her smile was brighter than the porch light. The next morning, the entire office exploded. Apparently someone had seen us leaving together. Rumors spread faster than software updates. By noon, people were whispering every time I walked past. At 1 o'clock, Human Resources asked to speak with me. At 2, my best friend Noah burst into my office. Dude, what? Are you secretly dating the CEO? I honestly don't know. He stared. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Then my desk phone rang. It was Evelyn's assistant. Harper would like to see you. Every head in the department turned toward me. I walked into her office, expecting disaster. She closed the door. I'm sorry. For what? The rumors. I shrugged. They were inevitable. She looked guilty. I underestimated how quickly people would notice. Are we in trouble? She shook her head. I've already informed the board. My heart stopped. You what? They reminded me there are policies. And I told them I'd follow every single one. She handed me a folder. Inside were conflict of interest guidelines, transfer options, reporting changes. Everything had already been arranged. You planned this. I had to. She looked directly at me. I would never risk your career. That mattered more than I expected. Over the next few months, things changed. I transferred to a different division with a new reporting structure. We kept our relationship quiet, but never secret. People stared. People judged. Gossip sites invented stories. Some claimed I was after her money. Others insisted she'd manipulated me. Neither was true. The truth was much simpler. She liked the way I reminded her to stop working. I liked the way she challenged me to dream bigger. One evening I found her asleep on her living room couch, with her laptop still open. The screen displayed 73 unread emails. I quietly closed it. She woke. I was working. You were sleeping. They're different. No. She rubbed her eyes. I'm failing. At what? Balance. I sat beside her. You spent 20 years becoming an extraordinary CEO. She looked at me. You've spent 2 months becoming an ordinary person. She laughed softly. I hadn't thought of it that way. Give yourself time. The biggest test came 6 months later. An investor publicly accused me of receiving special treatment. The story exploded online. Reporters camped outside headquarters. The board called an emergency meeting. I offered to resign. Evelyn refused. No, you're risking the company. I'm protecting what's right. They'll blame you. They already do. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. For the first time in my life, she smiled. I don't care. The independent investigation lasted 3 weeks. They reviewed every email, every promotion, every project. Their conclusion was simple. I'd earned everything before we ever went on that first date. The accusations disappeared. Most people moved on. Some never believed us. That was their choice. A year later, Holloway Technologies celebrated its 20th anniversary. At the company gala, Evelyn stood on stage before hundreds of employees. I've spent most of my career believing success meant sacrificing everything else. She looked toward me. I was wrong. The room followed her gaze. I built an incredible company. She smiled. But someone reminded me that companies aren't the reason we live. Applause filled the ballroom. Later that night, we slipped outside onto the terrace overlooking the city lights. You embarrassed me, I teased. I know. You planned that speech. I did. She leaned against the railing. Remember the first thing I ever said to you? I laughed. How could I forget? She grinned. We're going on our first date, and you don't get a vote. Worst invitation ever. Really? It worked. She bumped my shoulder. I've improved since then. You definitely have. She reached into her coat pocket. I have one more question. She knelt on one knee. Every thought vanished from my head. This time, she said, holding up a small velvet box, you absolutely get a vote. She opened it. Inside was a simple platinum ring. No speeches. Her voice trembled, for the first time since I'd met her. No executive confidence. She smiled through nervous eyes. Just, will you marry me? I stared at her, at the woman who had once terrified an entire boardroom, who could negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking, who was now waiting for one ordinary man's answer with hope written across her face. I laughed, not because it was funny, because happiness sometimes arrives so suddenly your heart doesn't know what else to do. I pulled her to her feet. You know, I whispered, for someone who once told me I didn't get a vote. She smiled. You're asking very politely now. I learned. I kissed her forehead. My vote is yes. As the city shimmered beneath us, I realized something I'd never understood before. Power doesn't make someone extraordinary. Money doesn't. Titles don't. The most extraordinary thing anyone can do is let another person see who they really are. The world knew Evelyn Harper as the fearless CEO who built an empire. I knew the woman who loved pancakes in tiny diners, walked through the rain like a child discovering magic, forgot to sleep when she cared too much, and had been lonely long before she became successful. And she knew me as the man who wasn't afraid to disagree with her, who believed weekends mattered, who thought cardboard castles with his niece were just as important as million-dollar contracts. People still ask how our story began. They expect something glamorous, a luxury vacation, a charity gala, a private jet. Instead, I tell them the truth. It started in a rattling old sedan after work, when the most intimidating woman I'd ever met climbed into my passenger seat, stole control of my evening, and accidentally gave me the best life I never knew I wanted. Looking back, I think she was wrong about one thing. I did get a vote. She just made sure I stayed long enough to realize how much I wanted to use it.